Well, I think housing is a real issue in Kensington and Chelsea, as indeed it is in several other central London boroughs. And the real problem is that we don't have enough housing for people on the council's waiting list. We have a lot of housing association properties, and we also have a lot of people who would like to be able to buy in the borough but can't because house prices are so high. So I think there is an opportunity to think more imaginatively about what we do with our land, such as we have, and where we're thinking about doing estate refurbishment, there may be opportunities in particular locations on some of the older estates to actually think about remodelling the estate. And I think what worries people is that where they're tenants, they obviously enjoy the company of their neighbours, their neighbourhood, and they want to be sure that if there is remodelling of the estate and better quality housing at the end of it, that they can actually come back at the end of the process. So I think looking hard at our refurbishment, saying are there opportunities actually to develop some of our estates to make more of a neighbourhood, so there's local businesses, local shops, jobs that people can actually walk to from where they live, and a variety of housing, but where people who've lived in that neighbourhood feel that they can come back to an even better quality environment. That's what the council needs to think imaginatively about, and I hope under my leadership we'll be doing that. Well, I think it's important to remember that the council tax only raises about 25% of all the money that the council needs to spend providing the services that they do. And I'm absolutely committed to keeping the council tax low. We have the 4th lowest council tax in the UK, and I'm very keen that we should stay at that kind of position, a really low council tax. But I think it's dangerous in the current financial climate to give a pledge which might then prove difficult to honour in later years, because I think that the pressure on local government expenditure is going to continue for a number of years to come. So yes, it's true we have fairly large reserves, but those reserves can only be spent once. We tend to spend them on things like capital refurbishment, so that we've got good quality stock that doesn't need high amounts of maintenance money being spent on a repeat basis. And we also tend to use it to smooth any bumps in expenditure. So although it looks as though there's a large reserve, it's actually only accounting for about a quarter of our total annual expenditure. Well, the rebuilding of Holland Park School, which has just reopened, the establishment of a new academy in Chelsea, and currently under construction at the moment a new academy in North Kensington. These are real educational steps forward for the borough, and I have to pay tribute to my predecessor, Sir Eric Cockell, who's really pushed the educational agenda. Without good quality secondary schools, you can't give people the opportunity they need to succeed. So it's been really important to get those 3 schools, those 3 academies established in the borough. We also have been doing a lot to invest in our primary schools. We've been upgrading the building and the infrastructure, and of course there's a big new development going on towards the west end of Kensington High Street, and that itself, part of the planning deal, will incorporate a new primary school. So there's a lot going on to upgrade those first step opportunities that the council needs to be providing for young people. The Earl's Court redevelopment is one of the biggest planning projects likely to be undertaken in central London over the next 20 or so years. It will be a phased project, and of course it's a project which spans 2 boroughs, not just ourselves, but also Hammersmith and Fulham next door. It's a complicated site. The exhibition centre's reached the end of its life. There's a lot of wasted land around that exhibition centre, and it does provide an opportunity, with the right sorts of developments, to increase the amount of housing available, to create a more attractive environment, new parks, new squares, new shops, and that's what the potential of the development offers. But it's very important we get it right. It's very important that local people are consulted and involved in that plan, and I hope in 20 or 30 years' time Earl's Court will look different, and it will tie into the whole of the West Brompton neighbourhood more effectively than it does at the moment. Well, South Kensington and Exhibition Road are currently attracting more visitors every year than the City of Venice. Huge numbers of people arrive at these world-class museums and institutions via the tube station at South Kensington, which is one of the oldest on the London Underground network. So it probably is time to see a remodelling of the station to provide a much bigger ticket hall, provide step-free access for visitors to the platforms, and to ensure that the station can cope with the number of people coming to the newly refurbished South Kensington area. The actual redevelopment of the station is a matter for Transport for London, and we will want them to talk to both the council and local residents who will be affected to come up with a scheme which is acceptable, the appropriate scale and the right sort of architecture to fit into this important part of South Kensington. But it is fair to say at the moment, really the station isn't fit for purpose, certainly at the busiest times of the year. Well, I think any councillor in Kensington and Chelsea will tell you that their mailbag or their email box is probably fullest with comments, criticisms, concerns expressed by residents about the number of basements which are being constructed. And it's not the end product which is so much the problem, although it's very important that basements don't in any way impede our ability to manage surface water flooding. So there need to be strict regulations about how much garden space is taken up, how much soakaway space is put on top of the basement. The real problem, though, is in the construction, the disruption to neighbourhoods, the work, the traffic, the general noise and dirt. And so one of the things that we're currently doing is to review our core strategy provisions on basements, to limit the scale of the developments permitted, to look at how much garden space is being taken up, and to ensure that the construction plan and the traffic plan are part of the initial planning application, so that the planning committee get a chance to look at all the associated disruption that will be caused by a development and get a chance to require modifications to those plans where they're not satisfactory. But any change we make to the council's core strategy, our main planning document, has to withstand going through an inspection process by the planning inspectorate. That we expect to happen later this year, later in 2013, and that will be an important staging post in getting a series of policies which do enable people to put in basements, but to do it in a way that is reasonable and doesn't disrupt their neighbours forever and ever. I think it's very important that we provide residents with value for money. All the services that they recognise and value and make use of have to be provided in a cost-effective way. That is what Tri-Borough and the work that we're doing with our neighbouring boroughs in Westminster and Hammersmith and Fulham is all about. It's about sharing back office costs, management costs, particularly senior management costs, looking at benchmarking, looking at how the boroughs get best value for money, and then ensuring that in each of the boroughs we have the sovereignty guarantee, which means that we provide the level of service which our residents are expecting. And that can vary considerably in the different boroughs, but it does mean that where behind the scenes costs can be shared, departments can be shared, senior staff can work together, that we make the savings there where hopefully they're not noticeable to the public who consume the services. And it is worth remembering that councils like Kensington and Chelsea provide up to 600 different services during the course of a year. So there's a huge amount going on. We have to make sure that every one of those services provides value for money, but also good quality to our residents. It's extremely important for us to have sources of local employment. A lot of people who live here commute into the city and they work in the financial services sector, and that's wonderful. But for people who don't, it's quite important that we have local businesses that can provide them with jobs and security and prosperity. And one of the things Kensington and Chelsea was always well known for, and still is to some extent, but only in certain locations, is the world of design, fashion, arts, photography, film and music. And particularly in North Kensington, where property prices aren't quite so expensive, there is a burgeoning cultural sector which is developing. And I'm very keen that the council should encourage that, and that we should make space so that people can start small businesses, particularly in the north of the borough, that will then employ local people. Well, I think residents in Kensington and Chelsea are very concerned about the potential expansion of Heathrow, as indeed they are in several other central and west London boroughs. The fact of the matter is that Heathrow is a constrained site. In order to provide the sort of capacity that operators would like to see, there would have to be a massive expansion, more runways, parallel approach flights over central London and over the borough. So I think there's going to be a real problem about expanding Heathrow. too many difficulties, not enough infrastructure, and too much disruption to residents who live under the flight paths. I'm rather surprised at that particular question, because actually in Kensington and Chelsea, household waste is collected on bank holidays, and I just checked that this morning with the Director of Waste to ensure that I wasn't giving an inaccurate answer. But rubbish is collected in Kensington and Chelsea from all households twice a week. We collect both recyclables and residual rubbish, which has to go to the energy from waste plant over at Belvedere. I think we've got one of the best waste collection systems in the whole of the country. Lots of people would be crying out for once a week waste collection, let alone twice a week. We've got good levels of recycling, although we need to get it up. We've got very high standards of street sweeping, and I think collecting on bank holidays is an important part of the service we offer to residents.